Emmett Burns regarded the sprawling metropolis of Wichita from his office window, the city's gray streets veined with the gold of sunset. The unassuming cityscape bore the weight of its sordid underbelly lightly. Amidst this landscape of suburban simplicity and urban decay, his gaze was riveted on a modest structure tucked away in the labyrinthine network of alleyways. A small church, as stoic as time itself. A shroud of silence hung about Emmett's office, only disturbed by the occasional rustle of case files, as yellowed as the teeth of the addicts haunting Wichita's grim corners. His desk was a museum of unsolved riddles, all leading him back to the quaint church like a moth to a flame. He unfolded a dog-eared photograph, an aerial view of the church, its shadow an inky blemish on the city's heart. He was marked by a unique scar. A survivor of a devastating fire, he bore on his skin the remembrance of the flames, a red and white canvas of pain and endurance. His fingers, gnarled by the unforgiving blaze, traced the jagged line dividing his face, a memento of the fateful night that had consumed his world. His strikingly blue eyes reflected the flames of the past and his steadfast determination, a contrast as sharp as the dichotomy of his facial features. An orphan of circumstance, he'd been pulled from the belly of fire by a stranger whose face had been lost to time. In the ruins of his past, he'd found a token, a small silver pendant shaped like a phoenix. His savior remained unknown, but the phoenix pendant became his beacon of hope, the debt he owed, a life for a life. A knock on the door stirred him from his reverie. In walked Clara, a beacon of light in the shadowy world of law enforcement. A veteran officer with the wisdom of ages nestled in her smile lines. Her presence was a reassurance and a grim reminder of the world's chaos. Another one, Emmett. She placed a file before him, her voice, usually warm, now an icy whisper. On top of the stack lay a small bag, a chillingly familiar symbol carved into a wooden totem. A phoenix. A shiver snaked down his spine as his past intersected with the present. "Drugs again, near the church," Clara reported, a cold dread veiling her words. He picked up the totem, the rough texture of the wood against his scarred palm, a stark contrast to the smooth silver of his pendant. "Same markings?" he inquired, a steel edge in his voice. She nodded, a shadow of concern flickering in her eyes. "Same as always. It's a sign, Emmett. The church." He stared at the phoenix, the weight of his past mingling with the gravity of the case before him. A profound silence engulfed the room. He finally broke the silence, his voice resolute. "It's time to pay my debt." As the last vestiges of the day dissolved into twilight, he found himself drawn into the labyrinth that was the Phoenix case, his resolve fortified by the specter of his past. This unassuming church and the monsters it sheltered had no inkling of the tempest that was about to descend upon them. Emmett stood before the church under the weak pallor of dawn, the innocuous structure shrouded in a thick layer of foreboding. The church was an enigma, a confluence of past and present, its limestone facades whispering tales of the mundane and macabre. He let his eyes drift upwards to the steeple, its pointed apex piercing the early morning mist, a silent sentinel keeping watch over the town's secrets. As he stepped inside, the eerie calm of the church interior washed over him, stirring the ashes of his own memories. The air was heavy with the scent of aged wood, polished until it gleamed in the dim light, an incense, a hauntingly sweet aroma that seemed to ensnare rather than cleanse. The sanctuary's stained glass windows cast a kaleidoscope of color across the worn stone floors, a dance of shadows and light that echoed the city's dichotomy. He was not alone. In the pulpit stood a figure, Reverend Mile, draped in the theatricality of his clerical robes, his eyes reflecting the multi-hued spectacle of the stained glass. A halo of tranquility surrounded him, the calm of a serpent before the strike. Emmett moved towards the pulpit, his boots echoing ominously against the stone. The Reverend's gaze never wavered, observing him with an unsettling intensity. Emmett extended a hand. "Detective Burns." "A pleasure, Detective." The priest's voice slithered around the sanctuary, a viper veiled in the garb of a lamb. His handshake was cold, sending a ripple of disquiet through Emmett. "I'm investigating a series of crimes linked to this vicinity." Emmett let the silence hang in the air, the unspoken accusation resting between them. The Reverend merely nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips, inviting him to continue. Their conversation danced on the knife's edge, an intricate tango of questions and elusive answers. As Emmett dug deeper, the Reverend deflected and parried, his responses as cryptic as the scriptures that clung to the church walls. "Does the phoenix mean anything to you, Reverend?" Emmett finally asked, his gaze fixed on Miles, a silent duel of wills echoing in the silence of the church. He pulled out the wooden totem, placing it between them. The Reverend paused, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly before the practiced smile returned. "A symbol of rebirth, a creature rising from its ashes to start anew. Why do you ask, detective?" Emmett could feel the serpent coiling, its tongue flicking out to taste the air. He pocketed the totem, standing to leave. "Just investigating all angles. I'm sure you understand." As he left the church, the chilling prospect of a deeper horror began to take root in his mind. Behind the facade of faith, he sensed the serpentine coil of a darker truth, a cult lurking in the shadows. The Phoenix's mystery seemed to deepen, intertwining with the Reverend's cryptic aura, driving Emmett further into the labyrinth of the church's secrets. As the church door closed behind him, leaving the veiled threats of Reverend Mile behind, he couldn't shake the gnawing feeling of dread. His past, the Phoenix, and the church seemed inextricably linked in a disconcerting puzzle which demanded resolution. As the city awoke around him, he ventured deeper into its shadows, a lone crusader poised at the edge of a chasm that promised only darker revelations. Late night shrouded Wichita, its inky blanket pierced only by the haphazard flicker of streetlights. Under this spectral half-light, the church stood, a monstrous silhouette against the charcoal sky. The innocent charm it held by day had contorted into a haunting architectural specter. Emmett, ensconced in the cloaking anonymity of the night, observed from a distance. The church, dormant for most of the day, now seemed to stir with an eerie life of its own. Shadows shifted behind its stained glass windows, and the faint echo of chanting crawled out from its depths, a spectral dirge winding its way through the city's silent arteries. Summoning his courage, he made his way towards the unholy gathering, slipping through the church's back entrance. The labyrinthine bowels of the church were a far cry from its staid, public face. Twisted corridors stretched out, lit by sputtering torches that threw grotesque shadows onto the stone. He followed the mournful symphony of the chant, arriving at a cavernous room bathed in a sickly green luminescence. The sight that met his eyes was a grotesque tableau, plucked from a madman's nightmare. A congregation in a macabre dance around an altar, their faces hidden beneath grotesque masks. The priest, Reverend Mile, towered over them, his robe now crimson under the unearthly glow, his voice raised in an alien sermon that seemed to shake the very foundations of the church. He watched in frozen horror as the ceremony reached its horrifying climax. A body was brought forth, an offering for the feast. The reality of their cannibalistic rites hit him with a visceral punch, a nightmarish mirror to the communal feast he had taken part in as a young altar boy. The cult was a perverse corruption of all he had held sacred, a harrowing revelation that seemed to gnaw at his very sanity. His breath hitched as he noticed the carved wooden phoenix adorning the altar, an eerie twin to the one he'd found. This symbol of his rebirth was now a twisted insignia of a horrifying communion. The cult's beliefs seemed to echo his own trauma, a sickening epiphany that threatened to unravel him. As the feast concluded, he retreated, mind reeling with the unholy spectacle he'd witnessed. The sanctuary of the church had been defiled by the vilest of practices, the spiritual sanctity now a desolate wasteland. The dread in his heart had solidified into a chilling reality. The church was not just sheltering drug dealers, but breeding monsters, their perverse worship veiled under the cloak of divinity. He emerged from the church, the scent of incense clinging to him like the spectral fingers of the cult, a horrifying shroud over the city's heart. The secrets he'd uncovered formed a ghastly jigsaw, his past and the church's corruption fitting together in an unholy alliance. As he walked away from the building that held such monstrous secrets, his resolve was ironclad. He knew what he had to do. The church had to be confronted, its secrets laid bare under the merciless glare of justice. The unforgiving noon sun cast long shadows over the cityscape as Emmett prepared for his final confrontation with the church. His normally stoic demeanor was overlaid with a tense anticipation. Each beat of his heart echoed the ticking of a countdown to the unavoidable clash. His office had transformed into a war room, walls lined with maps and case files, the gruesome artifacts of his investigation. Clara stood by him, her steely determination an echo of his own, the stoic duo against a tide of malevolence. He reached for the pendant around his neck, the silver phoenix gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Its symbolism was a double-edged sword, a token of his past, a symbol of his indebtedness, and a sinister insignia of the church's monstrous feast. The church had tried to warp its meaning, but to him it was the symbol of his survival, his rebirth from the ashes of tragedy. Today it would be the emblem of his triumph. With Clara and a carefully selected team of officers, he descended upon the church. The structure, once benign, now loomed ominously like an ancient behemoth awakened. The echoes of the unholy ceremony still clung to its walls, a chilling welcome for the impending battle. Confronting Reverend Mile in his sanctuary, he felt the weight of his mission pressing upon him. The priest's serpent gaze held a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by an unsettling calm. A duel of wills ensued, the air fraught with tension, each word laden with the weight of accusation and denial. "The Feast of Shadows ends today, Reverend," Emmett declared, the phoenix pendant burning cold against his chest. The silence was deafening, the congregation awaiting Miles' response. Instead of the expected defiance, an unholy laughter echoed from Mile, a chilling sound that seemed to seep into the very stones of the church. "And who will believe you, detective? A man scarred by his past, a desperate orphan chasing shadows?" Emmett felt a surge of resolve. He was indeed an orphan, scarred by the past, but it was not desperation that drove him, but justice. With a steely gaze, he countered, "The shadows I chase, Reverend, are your creation. This ends today." The showdown was a cataclysm, a whirlwind of arrests and revelations. The church's secret catacombs were revealed to the world, its unholy practices exposed to the harsh light of justice. The congregation watched in stunned silence as their shepherd was unmasked. Not a man of God, but a monster wearing a mask of faith. Emmett stood in the chaos, a lone figure against the tide of a scandal that shook the city. Amidst the ruins of the malevolent cult, he had emerged victorious, the church's unholy reign brought to an end. His past and the cult's corruption, once entwined, were now ripped apart. The phoenix pendant, once a symbol of his pain and their power, was now purely an emblem of his strength, his triumph over his personal and professional demons. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of victory, he stood tall amidst the ruins of the church. The shadow of the cult was finally lifted, and under its wreckage, a phoenix had truly risen. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like it and subscribe to our channel, where you can find more similar stories, and click on the bell icon to never miss one. There is plenty more cosmic horror to come from the Eldritch Tales Factory. Stay tuned, and until next time.